In this video, I will show you how I use Obsidian with the Zettelkasten method and how I take smart notes. Whether you already know how to use Obsidian and you're familiar with the Zettelkasten method, or you're a complete newbie, this video will show you how to get started. I also have an introductory video about Zettelkasten that you can watch on my channel. It explains why Zettelkasten is the best note-taking method ever. In this video, however, I'm going to give you practical tips to get started with your Zettelkasten and Obsidian journey as fast as possible. Hopefully this video will serve as an inspiration and you will finally get started. So, quick disclaimer before we start. This video explains how I understand Zettelkasten. I watched a lot of YouTube videos and I even read one of the most popular books about the method. But I still had to change and tweak some things to suit my needs. So if you have any questions, you can ask them in the comment section and I will respond as fast as possible. What I've noticed is that YouTube is filled with Zettelkasten content, but every person explains it differently. If you watch 10 YouTubers, 10 people will tell you different things. People use different names for the same thing. Some people say reference notes, others call it literature notes. Some people say permanent notes, others call it evergreen notes. So if you feel confused, that's totally normal. I think if you understand the gist of Zettelkasten and you can create your own vault and create a system that will work for you, that's what matters. You don't have to follow rigid rules, read a lot of books, or watch a lot of content. As long as you understand it and it works for you, that's totally okay. So my advice to anyone who wants to start their Zettelkasten and Obsidian journey is to avoid watching hundreds of YouTube videos and just get started as soon as possible. And that way you will understand which areas need improvement and which parts of the Zettelkasten are clear. So start by doing and not by passively consuming content. So now I'm going to show you how you can set up your Obsidian Vault, how you can download the app, and where to get it. So the first step that you need to take is you need to download the app. And to do this, just go to Google and type Obsidian. As you can see, the first website that appears is Obsidian's official website. Click on it, then go to Get Obsidian for Mac. If you're using Windows, you can click to More Platforms. I use Mac, so I'm going to download Mac. So I already have Obsidian on my computer, so I'm not going to install it again, but the process is very simple. Install it just like you would install any other app. When you're first opening the app, you will see that you need to create a vault. To do this, click on Create here. You can also choose the language. If you don't want to use English, you can choose something else. So let's say you named your vault. Now the most important part is to choose a location. For me, I keep my Obsidian Vault on my iCloud, and I also have backups on my Google Drive and on OneDrive. If you're not planning to use Obsidian Sync, which is a paid option for Obsidian users, I suggest you keep all of your information on a cloud service. You can also keep it on your computer, but then you will have to manually create backups because unfortunately there's always a possibility of losing your data. So create backups as often as possible. And if you're too lazy to create backups and keep it in separate folders, just pay for Obsidian Sync. As far as I'm concerned, it's like $5 or something. You might say, well, other apps just sync across platforms easily. Why would I pay for a feature like that? That's a valid concern. But the cool thing about Obsidian is that it's local and your data is not being stored somewhere else. So this is the whole point of having an Obsidian Vault. This is why it's called a vault, because it's supposed to be safe. So the choice is yours. You can keep it on your iCloud, you can keep it on your Google Drive, or you can just pay for Obsidian Sync. And now let's create your vault. Let's choose a location and click Create. This is how your vault will look if you're a complete beginner in Obsidian. So let's delete this welcome document, we don't really need it. The first thing that every Obsidian and Zettelkasten user needs is to create folders. And now let's talk about them in detail. If you want to start your Zettelkasten journey in Obsidian or in any other app, you need 3 folders. Let me give you a brief introduction to the app. To create a new folder, you need to click here. And the first folder that we're going to create is Fleeting Notes. The second folder is Literature Notes. The third and last folder is Permanent Notes. To create a new note in Obsidian, you have to click here. Just like any other note-taking app, Obsidian has shortcuts, and it would be beneficial for you to learn them as soon as possible. If there are certain shortcuts that you would like to use, you can go to Settings, Hotkeys, and create the shortcut that you like. You don't have to stick to default shortcuts. So besides its linking features, Obsidian also has tags. As you can see, creating tags is pretty straightforward. You just have to press dash and then write whatever you like. Creating connections in Obsidian is extremely simple. Just press to the brackets key. Press twice, write whatever you want, and your notes will be connected. And when you click to this text, you will see that a new note is created. And if you look at the graph view, they are connected to each other. Every note that you create in Obsidian is automatically placed in this panel. But if you don't like clutter, go to Settings, choose Files and Links, and change the default location for new notes. Let's say in the folder specified below, and then choose Fleeting Notes. This way, every note that you create will automatically go to the Fleeting Notes folder. If you do that, your Obsidian vault will not be cluttered with a lot of notes. If you want to search for a specific note, you can click to this magnifier icon and start searching. There's also a bookmarks feature where you can keep your favorite documents. You can create daily notes, which is one of the best features that Obsidian has to offer, and it's great if you like morning pages or you like journaling every day. You can even plan your days in daily notes. Besides creating notes, you can create canvases. It's good for mind maps or mood boards. If you want to see your graph view, you can see it here. It's also on the right side, so I generally use this tab. You can expand this panel, which has backlinks, outgoing links, tags, and outline. If you don't want to create the same notes over and over again, you can create templates. And here you can open a command palette, which is very useful, but as a beginner, I don't think you will use it that much. You will understand the app better with time. As a complete newbie, I would suggest to stick to the most basic features and not overwhelm yourself with complicated but unnecessary features. Okay, so now let's talk about the types of folders that you will need in order to start your Zettelkasten journey. I talked about this topic in my previous video, but I will talk about it one more time for you to understand better. The first type is Fleeting Notes. For me, Fleeting Notes folder is where I put everything that comes into my mind. It serves as an inbox folder. Fleeting Note folder is for notes that are not that important to you. Fleeting Note is the type of note that you will process in the future and then you will delete it. You can use Fleeting Notes as the capture stage in your note-taking. In the Fleeting Notes folder, you can keep your thoughts, your opinions, something that you've heard from a friend, something that you found online, knowing that you will process them later. Most of the notes that I put in that folder are either will be deleted or they will be processed and transferred to permanent notes folder. In Fleeting Notes, I don't have a specific structure. I just create a note and then I write everything that comes to my mind. If there's a specific resource that I want to refer to, I don't create links. I just mention it because I know that I will process it in the future. You will not find any connections in my Fleeting Notes. My Fleeting Notes is just a stream of consciousness. It's like a brain dump to me. The second type is Literature Notes. Literature notes are about the content that you consume online or offline. My literature notes are divided into separate categories. I know that Zettelkasten is not about rigid folder structures, but I like to keep it that way. If you look at my folders in the Literature Notes tab, you will see that I have articles, books, courses, lectures, podcasts, and so on. Basically, I divide all the content that I consume into separate folders. You don't have to separate everything like I do. You can either use tags or you can just put everything into Literature Notes folder. I prefer to keep it that way because otherwise it feels too cluttered. Literature Notes is your reference folder. You can put anything that you read, that you watch, or you listen to. If you find an interesting quote in a book, put it in that folder. If you have notes from YouTube videos or podcasts, you can keep it in this folder. I think you understand the point. In Literature Notes, I have a specific structure. So in my Literature Notes, I generally have the name of the note. If it's a book, I will write the title of the book and the author's name. Then I have tags. I believe that using 2 to 3 tags is enough for my database. Generally, I use broad words like psychology, philosophy, reading, focus. I use something that I know I can easily find. For me, using tags is like putting my note into a specific category. I don't rely on it for search. I just categorize them in that way. I know that if I want to search for something very specific, I will rely on links for that. I know it might be unimportant to some people, but I like to see dates and I like to see when I was learning something or when I was studying something. It's really useful for me to look back and to see that, let's say in March last year, I learned that concept and 2 months ago, I was interested in this information. Then I would create an outline. If it's a book, I would outline every single chapter of that book because I don't like to get distracted later when I'm reading the book. I already want to have an existing structure when I'm learning the material. So generally when I read, I would take notes of everything that I find interesting. But if there's a specific concept that I'm really interested in, that I see potential in, that I know that I will be using in the future, or maybe I can create content about it, then I'm going to transfer that idea to permanent notes. And when I create permanent notes, I try to make them atomic, just like I mentioned before. So as you can see, I have plain text, and beneath that text, I have my atomic notes. This is just the text that I find interesting, and I'm not really sure if I'm going to use it in the future. And these linked notes are notes that are important to me, and I will link them to my other permanent notes. At the very bottom, I have a reference/sources section. This is a place where I store every possible resource that I can refer to. So if a book that I'm reading mentions another book that I want to read, I would put it in that category. If books are somehow connected, I would add it here. If there's an article or YouTube video about this book, I will keep it here. Now, permanent notes. Permanent notes is the most confusing note type for most people. That's why I'm going to talk about it in detail. This is my favorite category because this is where the magic happens. New ideas and connections are born in this category. One of the most important things that you can do while taking permanent notes is to keep your notes short, meaning atomic. So what are atomic notes? Just like the name suggests, atomic notes are short notes. Ideally, they have to be so short that you don't have to scroll. Another crucial tip is to not use copy-paste in your permanent notes. When you just copy something from a book or you just highlight the sentence, there is always a chance that you don't understand the concept fully. I've researched this topic in the past and it is proven that if you highlight something in the book, it's basically useless. That's why you should explain everything that you consume with your own words. That way, you will actually understand the concepts better and remember them. See, writing something in your own words is almost like testing yourself. You're trying to see the gaps of knowledge that you have. Actually, in the book, How to Take Smart Notes, the author gives a great example about this. He talks about a famous scientist, Richard Feynman. He used to say that if you can't give an introductory lecture about something, then you don't understand it. It illustrates the importance of being able to talk about concepts in your own words and being able to explain them to other people. If somebody randomly reads your permanent notes, that person has to be able to understand what you meant. This is how clear and precise you should be in your permanent notes. Additionally to my previous advice, when creating new notes, consider your previous ones. You should consider how your new note is related to other ideas. Can you link this idea to your other ideas? How are you going to use it in the future? Is it even useful to have this note in your vault? Be selective about your notes and don't collect information for the sake of collecting it. Add sources and references and write in full sentences. Try to be as precise as possible. Write as if you're writing for someone else. Now let's look at the structure of my permanent notes. My permanent notes are not that different from my literature notes, but there's a couple of differences that you need to understand. Again, I have tags and date created. This is something that I always use. Then comes the note. The format of the note is short. I'm not going to write 2,000-word essay to explain a concept. I'm going to keep it simple, and ideally, I keep it so simple and so short that you don't have to scroll. Under my brief explanation of the concept, I have connected ideas. This is the section where different connections and new ideas are born. You can either link your permanent notes to similar ideas, or you can link them to opposing ideas. Why opposing ideas? First of all, I heard it from another YouTuber. I'm gonna leave her handle here. I also read about something similar in the book How to Take Smart Notes. If you have different ideas and opinions, the quality of your notes will increase. You will not be a victim of confirmation bias. And just like in my literature notes, I have references/sources section. I'm not going to explain it again, I just keep all my sources there. And this is the difference between these three types of notes. Once you understand the difference between them and create your own structure, Zettelkasten will be easy for you. So now I'm going to show you how I actually take notes in real time using this particular book. This is Hyperfocus by Chris Bailey, and when reading it, I always take notes in my Obsidian. So the first thing that I do when I take notes about books is that I create a new note. I add the title of the book and I add the author's name. Then comes the tags section and the author section. The reason why I have a separate link for the author is because sometimes I read books by the same author and I want to see the connections between those books. So the first thing that I did is I wrote down the outline of the book in my Obsidian note. I just went through all the chapters and I wrote everything down. So as you can see, the structure of this note is pretty simple. As I told you before, the first thing that I do is I have the chapter name and then I have a note. If I find something particularly interesting, then I create a separate permanent note about this concept. So for instance, in the first chapter, I have a note called 4 types of tasks. And when I click on it, you can see that I have an image from a book and I write about those 4 types of tasks. I also added tags, reference, which means that it came from this book, and similar concepts. Because this concept is very similar to Eisenhower matrix, I wanted to connect them. So if you look at the second chapter, I have a lot of concepts from psychology, and I took permanent notes about them because I can use them in the future. I also have ideas that I might use. For instance, we can multitask with habits. Or when we switch between tasks, our work takes 50% longer. I know that this idea is useful and I can use it in my content, so I took a separate note about it. So basically, if I was to summarize my process, it's quite simple. You just find specific information that you want to turn into permanent note and that you find very useful, and you create a separate note under the chapter name. So you might say, then what's the difference between these notes and these concepts? These notes are not that important. I want to keep them here. I might return to them later, but I don't think that they will be life-changing. But these things, the ones that I've linked, I can actually connect to other notes, and I will use them for my content or for something else. You can also add stuff that you already know. For instance, you might come across an idea that sounds too familiar and you don't want to create a separate note. You can just add it here, but you don't have to connect it. I also have my Kindle highlights at the very bottom of the page. When you're using Kindle or other ebook readers, it's quite nice to add every quote that you have in here. I also have a section with permanent notes and references. So the dilemma that I personally have is I either can put all the concepts under the chapter names, or I can just collect everything at the bottom right here where the permanent notes are. I'm still trying to see what works best, but I think I will stick to this structure because it just sounds better. And let's say that in the future I want to find where the idea of the rule of 3 comes, right? And it's very easy for me to find it in the book if I see that it's under the 3rd chapter. So in that sense, I feel like this structure works the best. In the references part, you can put everything that relates to this book. If you think that there's a similar book and it is somehow connected to this one, you can add the name here. For instance, Chris Bailey has another book that I've read and some ideas overlap. So it would be nice to add it here and to see them connecting together. By the way, if you feel like you will return to the book later and you want to find concepts easily, you can add the page number right where your note is. For instance, this is page 60. I could do something like page 60, and then it will be easier for me to find this note later. So let's go to this link. As you can see, what I did was I read this part, then I made a note, and I wrote everything in my own words, okay? Then I added a connections section, which is just a connection to a similar idea. And then at the very bottom, we have the name of the book. And of course, I have tags here. And so this whole note-taking system is super simple. The best thing that you can do right now is to start taking notes on your own and see what works best for you. because to find this structure, I had to try a lot of things. I want this tutorial to serve as an inspiration, and you can use this information as a foundation, but you will create your own system with time, and it probably will be very different from mine, and that's fine. So I also want to mention the way I organize my Zettelkasten, because I don't have 3 folders, I actually have 5. Besides having fleeting literature and permanent notes, I have content creation and I have unsorted folder. Content creation is for my YouTube videos. I have video scripts and I have all my videos ideas, and this is actually the script for the video that I'm filming right now. And I also have a folder called Unsorted. This folder is quite important because most of the folders that I don't want to see on a daily basis are in this folder. As you can see, I have attachments. So in the attachments folder, I have all my images and PDFs. Obsidian is not similar to Notion and Apple Notes in that way. If you have an image and if you paste it into the app, it has to be stored somewhere. And the best way to do it is to have a separate folder. I also have a clippings folder, and this clippings folder actually relates to Obsidian's new Chrome plugin. It basically saves content from the internet directly to your vault. I have my daily notes, I have monthly review, weekly review, and I will probably add a yearly review. I also have a separate folder for planning and a separate folder for templates. When it comes to templates, you can create as many templates as you like. I don't have many, I just have a template for atomic notes, for monthly review, or weekly review. And I have my rating folder where I keep my mini essays. With time, you will find the best ways to organize information in your vault. Some people like to keep their information very unstructured and they don't have a lot of folders. I am somewhere in the middle. While I don't like to have a lot of folders, I still need to have some kind of structure. So it's all up to you. If you find my folder structure useful, feel free to copy it. I want to give you additional Obsidian tips that you can use in order to avoid common mistakes that all beginners generally make. The first thing that I would like to say is that Obsidian is not that hard. I know some people think that Obsidian is very complicated. They think that Obsidian has a very steep learning curve and you need to watch a lot of tutorials and content to understand it. I do not agree with this. I think that if you use something like Notion, you can definitely use Obsidian. In fact, Obsidian is not that different from Apple Notes. It's just a text editor with Markdown, and the interface is not that complicated. The only thing that you have to understand as a beginner is that Obsidian uses Markdown. When I started out, I didn't know anything about Markdown, and I kinda hated it. I hated Markdown so much that I wanted to quit the program. But then I decided to learn it anyway. To understand how to use Markdown, you can just go to Google and write something like Markdown cheat sheet, and you will get everything you need to get started. If you don't know anything about Markdown, it can be quite hard at the beginning, but trust me, with time you will get used to it. Now let's talk about plugins. I feel like people who use Obsidian pay too much attention to plugins and waste a lot of time trying to constantly customize their vault and adding new plugins all the time. Don't overcrowd your vault with lots of plugins. Trust me, you don't need half of them. Your goal with Obsidian is to just take notes, and you don't need plugins to do that. You don't need to watch hours and hours of content about plugins. You don't need to watch tutorials. What you need to do is to get started. I'm not saying that you should avoid plugins altogether. What I'm saying is that you should probably stick to the bare minimum. Don't try to turn Obsidian into a content calendar, into a habit tracker, into a to-do list. Obsidian is for note-taking. So my advice would be to use it for note-taking only. I personally have a clear separation between my apps. I'm not trying to keep my to-do list in Obsidian because I have Todoist for that. If I want a calendar, I will use Google Calendar. And if I want to track my habits, I will probably use pen and paper. If I try to constantly customize my Obsidian, I will have the same problem that I had with Notion. It would distract me, and in the end, I would just hate the app because I waste so much time in it. My advice is to be as minimalistic as possible and to not focus too much on plugins. If you look at the list of my plugins, I actually don't have a lot of them. I have a calendar, checklist. I use this plugin to clear unused images. I have this custom font loader because I wanted to change my font from sans serif to serif. I have this plugin because I want to see how many notes I have in here. Natural language dates is a great plugin if you want to add dates without typing them manually. Outliner plugin helps me to see the outline of my documents like this. Periodic notes is to create daily, weekly, and monthly notes. Reading time shows you how many minutes it takes to read your note. It's quite useful if you create content and write YouTube scripts. And I have a recent files plugin, which shows me my recent files on this panel. In total, I have 10 plugins, which by the standards of Obsidian is not that much. Now let's talk about the main reason why I use Obsidian, and it is the graph view. A lot of people find graph view useless and they say that they have no idea how to use it. I personally like using graph view a lot. The reason why I like it so much is because I can see clusters of information. The graph view in Obsidian is a powerful visual tool that shows you the connections between your notes. It helps you to visualize how your ideas are connected together, providing a bird's eye view of your knowledge base. You can see unrelated concepts and ideas connecting to each other in pretty unpredictable ways. The graph view also helps you to identify orphan notes, which means that you connect them to your knowledge base and create new links. If you're working on a specific topic, the local graph view helps you to focus on specific subjects. It's perfect if you want to dive deeper into certain subjects and learn them deeply. To me, graph view gamifies the whole process of note-taking because I can see how my second brain is constantly evolving and growing. So I really hope that this video was helpful and you will finally start your Obsidian and Zettelkasten journey. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the comment section and I will respond as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching this video and I will see you in the next one.